All right, Liberty Paint Factory. This kind of goes back to chapter 9 a little bit, but why is he there? Why is he at Liberty Paints? Okay, so remember when chapter 9, when he's going to all the places where the letters from Bledsoe are telling him to go, the one place he goes to is Emerson's office. Main Emerson is not there. Young Emerson, the son, is there. Remember, Emerson's trying to help him kind of start to find his way a little bit. So young Emerson helps him find a job. We didn't really get into young Emerson and talking about him all that much last time when we were doing the prologue to chapter 9. Remember, author Ellison, full name is Ralph Waldo Ellison. Father names him after Ralph Waldo Emerson. So it would seem pretty likely that there's probably a little bit of like a literary connection illusion that would be taking place with this.
Emerson didn't like directly help you get the job, right? He just said like, oh, this place would probably take you, and then Tim went there and like.
Right, and the reason for why the job, and you meet the whole union and all that kind of stuff. They're having union issues, employment issues. So they're hiring basically scab workers to come in, and so young African American who they don't have to worry about paying necessarily the same union wage and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's not here. You'll have a job, but there's a pretty good chance that you'll be able to find something here that'll at least kind of be able to support yourself. Historical Emerson, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, the writer, one of the main tenets that he tries to kind of get across to his readers is that they have to be self-reliant. You can't necessarily rely on other people to do things for you. Some folks might look at this as being, well, that's kind of hypocritical because he's relying on young Emerson to get him the job. But chapters 10 to 15, definitely going 16 through epilogue for the rest of the book. You do start to see Tim becoming a little bit more focused, self-reliant. He tends to be a little bit more assertive in his actions. I don't want to say he's necessarily less naive, but you certainly see him being a little bit more proactive as opposed to a person who was reactionary to basically everything that was going on through him. So there's a little bit of a shift that kind of starts to happen with him getting this job at Liberty Paints. What are some slogans or sayings that we associate with Liberty Paints? Hard to say white, right, and all this stuff without kind of messing them up. We got, yeah. Oops. If it's optic white, it's the white right, or it's the right white, if I can even talk. Who said that? This was like the big debate. Was it Brockway, Kimbrough? Brockway, Kimbrough. Brockway. What's the irony in Brockway being the speaker for this? He's black. And why does Tim kind of chuckle when Brockway even tells him? Because then there's like another little saying that starts to go in his mind where Tim kind of laughs to himself and thinks back to childhood. Okay, so white is right, which if you see a lot of, Ku Klux Klan march signs or pictures, historical documents, you'll see posters similar to that up there. So you have this racist idea that it makes Tim kind of think about that white is right. There's another saying, slogan, that's associated with Liberty Paints that's right in your face in all caps, center of the page on 196. And it's like literally right on the factory. So this is like the verbal saying that we have with Brockway. If it's optic white, it's the right white. Then we have Keep America Pure with Liberty Paints. So we got like slogan number 2. Anybody remember the logo for the paint company? It is, and then you remember like the word that gets used before it? It's not bald, because that's in the, it's a screaming eagle, which someone said sounds like a heavy metal band. I don't know of any screaming eagles. Hayden could now start his garage band, the Screaming Eagles. There is a band called Screeching Weasel. You could like do a battle of the bands with them. They did a Holden Caulfield song. Just saying, literary connection here. Chapter 10. Chapter 10 tends to be extended metaphor where Ellison does some heavy social commentary on United States here in like 1950. Obviously, one of those messages here that you can kind of take a look at is the whole idea of white is right. What do you think, or any ideas with Keep America Pure, with Liberty Paints, or Screaming Eagle as a logo for the company, where underlying messages or tones that Ellison could be trying to convey? We'll come over to Hayden as well.
Like the main product of white paint, they want to paint everything white. So that would be considered pure.
So white is pure. Okay, so building on to like the white is right idea. All right.
I was going to say something like that, but also with the Screaming Eagle being the logo, it's like they're really like enforcing it onto everybody.
So not
That same slogan.
so as opposed to being like peaceful eagle, more assertive with it.
Like they're forcing it on everybody.
So we're gonna paint everything white, like Matt said, and you're gonna deal with it whether you want to or not. Okay, Rebecca. So and really the whole idea of like Lucius being in the basement. If you go back to the Booker T. Washington speech, cast down your bucket, which we'll get to that here in a second. Whereas, and what does Washington state about it? We will start at the bottom, work our way up. Now that speech is 1895. Here you figure it's roughly like 1830s, 1840-ish or so, and Lucius Brockway is down at the bottom. Lucius Brockway came up with the slogan, but he's still down at the bottom and has yet to work his way up. Now, you could argue, well, Brockway's perfectly content being where he is. He's happy being at the bottom, but it's almost as if he's grown accustomed to it, and therefore I'm just going to kind of make the best situation out of it. So, yeah, you could certainly argue there is some black labor exploitation which would be taking place, which, again, is basically the way that Tim got his job. We can't come to agreement with our union, with our white workers, so we're just going to bring in people to fill it in. They'll be able to do it, hopefully, as good as they can, and then we can save a little bit of money with it.
I took the Screaming Eagle a different way than Hayden did. Doesn't Eagle signify justice or something?
Hopefully. The bald eagle is bird of, national bird and symbol.
So I think he's screaming like, saying, this isn't right.
Okay. Which is still going to be kind where, yeah, it's going to be white and you're going to like it, but still some kind of dissatisfaction, assertiveness is going to be happening with it. Where does the paint get used? Becca? Okay. Remember specifically like what kind? Monuments, and the word that we put in front of the monuments, is they're going to be national monuments. And also buildings. So of course people start thinking about the White House, being an example. But DC, national monuments, national buildings. Then there's a place that Tim thinks, I wonder if it's the same paint that they used at the back at his college. Because you remember the description of the college buildings were not just painted white, but the term we used was they were white washed, where you have this idea of this white paint getting used all over the place. Mention the whole idea about cast down your bucket. For some reason, I like drawing paint buckets. It's a natural, hidden talent. Look at that.
Oh, look at that.
Put a little shadow there.
Okay.
The bottom's a little shaky, but it's a smart board. It'll do. How do you make optic white paint?
10 drops.
You add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In art class, when you were painting in like 3rd grade, and you had like, I don't know, color red or something, and you were putting in like shading in a brick building or whatnot, you went, I need my red to be just a little bit darker. So you took the black paint, and rather than putting a little dab in, half of you like poured it in, and then you had a black mess of paint. Some of you were a little bit smarter, and you just did a couple of black drops of paint into your red paint. What generally still happens to that red paint? It still basically turns kind of black. If you take 10 drops, and they call it like there's a doping agent that is going into white paint, common sense is going to tell you that that paint is going to turn gray, black, some kind of various shades or whatnot. But here it turns not just white, optic white, the super bright white that would be happening. And this, I would say, is certainly kind of part of the symbolism that Ellison's kind of playing with here. Anyone want to take a wild guess on what percentage of the population in 1950 in the U.S. is African American? 10. What do we like to think of the United States as being when it comes to cultures, gender, races, religious, diverse? And the term that we use for it is melting pot.
Like that movie.
If you have a melting pot, you have a blend of cultures, diversity, whatever the case may be. What do you have happening in here as you have these black drops going into the bucket? It's not a blend, but what happens to them? They're gone. So, assimilation. You could argue that it's been absorbed. If you wanted to use term, like, and you were mentioning about employment, like with Brockway, what are we going to do with that 10% to make us even whiter? Exploit, could kind of be a term that would get used. But essentially, it's going to be overshadowed. It is going to become white, or it's going to get absorbed by the whiteness, and that diversity is not going to be there. There's not going to be a cultural blend, but we are going to have pure white. And you think about then, what is the paint being used for? Well, if it's getting used for the college buildings, and the students who are going there are being whitewashed, they're not being educationally trained, they're not being trained for profession or whatnot. What is happening if they're being whitewashed in the school? You're basically being assimilated or absorbed to be exploited and to benefit, the whiteness that would be there. The national monuments, this is the paint that's going to be used for it. We're going to take these drops and we're going to put them in, and everything is going to become pure white the way that from that government standpoint in 1950, Ellison could be arguing, is what they would want it to be.
It's like sort of like that, like 10% would be like the African American, and like the white people think that they're like better than the African Americans, and then they like, so like without them they're just like good, and then like once they're there it kind of boosts them up because they think they're like better than them, so they get like more.
Yeah, where you have this, and Brockway would be a perfect example of this, where still down at the bottom and the rest kind of gets pushed up to the top, and it's getting used therefore for its benefit. So even if that presence is still there, Brockway is still there, but what is it doing for the rest of the company? It's making life easier, it's making life better. It's something that can be used for our own good. Take someone like Norton. Norton might not benefit financially necessarily by being a trustee. I don't think Norton's life is any easier by being a white trustee at a black college, but what does it do for him? It makes him feel as though he's contributing, that he's doing something. You go back to like that white man's burden, lifting up a group of people. people, it makes us feel better, it makes us seem better, or we're the people who are doing what is necessary. And yeah, you still have those 10 drops that are still at the bottom. Another little part that kind of happens when Kimbrough is showing him how to do it and putting in the doping agent, Tim looks at the paint, and what does he see? There's like some streaks, some gray that's coming through it, and this is after like everything's, or before he messes everything up the first time anyway, but when he looks in it, he still sees streaks of gray, and Kimbrough's like, yep, that's the way that it should be. And folks will go, well, why can't Kimbrough see that it's not exactly right? I think you cannot take a look at it where reality can kind of, you have two different perspectives based on who you are. The world is different for the way an African American person could see it compared to a white person. I think a lot of us would argue the world is different from a female perspective than from a male perspective. The world is different from an adolescent, teenager perspective than it is from an adult perspective. I'm going to go old man, but I don't want to go quite that far. But you have varying perspectives of things, and maybe you don't necessarily see everything the right way. You have this doping agent that's going in. Tim messes it up by using the wrong stuff, and so he gets banished down to the basement where he's messing up this whole process of the stuff being absorbed and making the paint better. If you're not going to help us, what do we have to do? Then we're going to send you down to the basement, and you can be stuck down there with Lucius Brockway. But you think about, we're going from a melting pot standpoint to what is the United States? It's a paint bucket. You got a bucket here in chapter 10. You have a bucket in chapter 1. What's our chapter 1 bucket? Cast down your bucket. The speech. I almost have like a bucket motif happening. Anyone remember a bucket getting mentioned any other parts? And this would be like prologue to chapter 9 reading, not chapter 10 to chapter 15. There's a Bledsoe bucket reference that happens. The students have their own name for Dr. Bledsoe. They don't call him Blood, they don't call him Doctor, but behind his back they refer to him as... That was a better guess than a lot of other people have got so far. You're missing a word though. Actually two. Old.
Silly
Bucket. Head. Wise Bucket with Bledsoe, actually a pretty good name for him. Well, and the kid said his head is shaped like a bucket. Which, if your head was shaped like a bucket, you'd have like, I guess.
It's like Squidward's house. You literally just.
Looks like one of those stone heads that you see in
Easter Island type things.
That's what it looks like.
Oh yeah, it is.
School's whitewashed. Bledsoe, that gives the line that we were talking about that he delivers on 142, I think, to Tim about the kind of power that he has. I'll say yes, sir, just like any other, burrhead down here, but I have real power. What is Bledsoe worried about? He's worried about himself. He's worried about his own power. He's worried about he will play the game, but he's willing to sacrifice his students so that they become whitewashed so long as he's allowed to maintain his own kind of power, his own benefit. So he's essentially buying into the bucket idea where you can be absorbed, not going to worry about blending cultures or anything like that. What he's simply going to be worried about is himself. But you have the cast down your bucket speech, willing to start at the bottom, after he's in the arena with how many boxers? Those 10 who are basically doing what they have to be absorbed into what those white expectations are, and I'm willing to take punches to the mouth to deliver my speech if that means I'm going to go to the school where I'll therefore be whitewashed. But I'll do it happily. So then the fact that after that scene happens in chapter 1, that Tim would have a nightmare, basically with his grandfather dream, makes a whole lot more sense because the grandfather would recognize what's going on, but Tim is too naive to do it. And you can tell that certainly Tim's pretty naive in the way that the world is working. When you think about Lucius, if you were just to describe him as a character, what would be details that you would list? Lucius Brockway is old, crazy, resentful, toothless. Now I'm thinking about dragons.
Yeah, I know, right?
Stubborn. You know, he's violent. Thinks he has some power based on his white paint. He lives in a basement. So if you were to go, there's this old, crazy, resentful African American who's stubborn, violent, thinks he has white power, and lives in a basement. It sounds an awful lot like Tim, the prologue. Tim now, and this is where we're going to see the whole boomerang effect, because he talks about history in the prologue where it keeps repeating. There's going to be some elements where you see a lot of repetition taking place. Lucius Brockway got compensated for his slogan. He says the owner of the company gave me a bonus of $300. We'll talk about it more on Monday. Tim gets $300. From who?
From Jack.
Jack. Brotherhood. White organization, kind of like what we have going on here with the paint. So there's going to be some, and we'll get more into the money part itself, I'd say, on Monday, but we're going to start to see that there's more parallels that kind of link them together. Real quick, because I know chapter 11 was a scene that a lot of folks had questions about, and this is when he wakes up in the hospital. A couple things to keep in mind with the hospital. It's a factory hospital, so it's not that he's going to Passivant or Mercy, Allegheny General, anything like that. A public hospital, this would be a hospital that would be for the factory itself, for Liberty Paint Company. When Tim wakes up, because there's this huge explosion that takes place, where basically Brockway is the one who causes it with the boiler, so Tim then gets basically covered also in white paint. But he ends up in the hospital. When he wakes up, what would be some things that he notices, most of which we would probably consider to be kind of odd? Remember what it's made out of? Yeah, it's like a big glass box. What's like attached to his body is like wires, nodes, tubes. What are some things that he can't do or doesn't know? Doesn't know name. Taylor, what'd you say? He can't pretty much do it. He has an inability to, communicate, talk with the doctors. Mention that we got doctors. Remember anything he hears? Sounds, besides machines. He's not sure who for sure he hears, but he hears a female. Oh, we made it this far in the period, and now it's going to crap out on me. I'm writing voice. He hears a voice, and he also hears a scream coming along with it. So there's a woman screaming. Here's Beethoven's Fifth also in the background. So he wakes up, glass box, doesn't know who he is, wires attached to him, tubes attached to him, especially to his stomach, goodbye stream. Doctors, can't communicate, doesn't know his name. So what we have happening here, and this is where you start to see a change in Tim. Essentially, it becomes a symbolic rebirth scene that would be happening. Notice then you start having the eviction. You start having a little bit more assertive behavior. He thinks he sees Bledsoe and ends up dumping the spittoon on him, and then realizes it was the wrong guy. Has a couple more things where we'll talk about his new favorite food on page 266. But you start to see a little bit of a shift, a change in who he was before to the person that he is now at the end of chapter 11, beginning of chapter 12.
Yeah. So did they do something to like did they give him electric?
Yeah, the other part that makes it confusing and disturbing, you have electric shock, like, and I wouldn't even call it therapy at this point. You're also getting like racist comments happening with them because, you know, ooh, look, he really does have rhythm and stuff like that. I think Ellison is playing off of the 1930s. There were experiments that were done with sterilization, like on humans, to see what the different effects would be. All of the patients that they pulled were African Americans from prisons and insane asylums and things like that in the South. It was in Georgia. So I think he's kind of playing off that part a little bit. There's also, folks were asking earlier about the whole Buckeye the Rabbit. Do you know who Buckeye the Rabbit is? We didn't get a chance to look at it. We might in the next couple of weeks. Buckeye the Rabbit is a character from Uncle Remus Tales. It's a book that's written in like 1880, but it's based on plantation slave folklore. You have Buckeye the Rabbit, you have Brer Rabbit, you have Brer Bear, where it's basically like fables where the animals are, you know, kind of depicting humans and whatnot. Disney made a movie about it in 1946. Those of you who have been to Disney, if you went on Splash Mountain, you were on the ride for it with Song of the South. Zippity Doo Dah, Zippity Day is like the main song from it. You can't get the movie. It's not in circulation. It's like in the Disney vault because there's argument about racist overtones that were then. But Buckeye the Rabbit would be like a character from those tales. So it's African American like folklore from late 1700s, early 1800s. But Splash Mountain, you go, who are those characters? Song of the South. So you can't watch the movie, but you can look at it.
I never been to
You're not missing much.
I don't think I'd want to be wet